Welcome back, Gadgeteers. I figured we'd have a discussion today about the OBS settings that I use in Fedora Linux. Now, right now I'm on my ThinkPad P1, so you may be saying, wow, that video looks really bad. And that's because it does. The camera that we have in the ThinkPad P1 is only a 720p, but not even a good 720p camera. So you probably don't want to use the cam full screen too awful much, and we'll get into the different settings that you can use to get around that. So what is OBS Studio? Let's bring that up first. OBS Studio is a software package that allows you to record yourself, a desktop, other inputs. You could record audio inputs from other sources. So right now I've got a microphone plugged in my headset here that I'm using as an input, and all these different functions basically make you able to record and create videos. Now when I do my videos where I'm sitting at my desk, I use OBS. I bought a 4K camera, and I also have a desktop computer which is much more powerful. So we'll get into some of the limitations also on a laptop. Now, I would like to keep in mind, though, that doesn't mean it's all laptops, all flavors of Linux, and all processors, okay? Because in reality, this is what works for me, and this is the settings that seem to be best for me. But you may have a more powerful laptop and a different version of Linux, and you don't have to change any settings. But if you do find these pitfalls and problems, I'm going to show you some of the things you can do to work around that. So right now we're on full screen. Now I'm going to change this to what I call cam small. And I want to apologize. I'm recording with OBS Studio as well as showing it to you. So you can see that we have this camera and desktop within desktop within desktop going back to infinity. I know how annoying that can be, but these are the settings we're going to be working with right here. So you can see over here you create the scenes, and I've created a few different ones. Over here is the sources that I use. I have the screen capture, which is the desktop back here. I have the video capture device, which of course is me on the camera. And then I have mic auxiliary here. And right now I'm actually plugged in using my microphone. You may have to adjust in Linux your microphone volume rating, and I would like to point out that if you plug one in, the volume level is very much different for the one you plug in than the one that's built into the laptop or whatever. So if you find that 50% works great with your plug-in, and then you just assume you're out somewhere and you want to do a quick recording, you can't do that. You got to test, make sure that the audio is sufficient, and I recommend doing several tests just to make sure everything's kosher. So since we're talking about the microphone, I want to show you one other setting. Sometimes the audio and video go out of sync, and when that is the case, you can basically fix that problem. If I click the little icon right here, I can do advanced audio properties, and let's just make sure my face isn't covering everything up. So what I've done here, because my audio and video were out of sync, I've actually done a sync offset of 230 milliseconds. So I can't remember which way's which, I always forget, but essentially if the audio is behind or ahead, you can do a sync offset. So I've done a positive 230 milliseconds, while you can do a sync offset of minus 230 milliseconds, which I believe will make the audio come sooner in the recording. You could do this in the editor, but it's such a pain in the butt. It's actually easier to do it here. So again, it's trial and error. You have to try a setting and then record and see if stuff's in sync, and then try again. See if your video and audio are in sync. So I usually use a 230 millisecond offset for this ThinkPad P1 using Fedora Linux 29 with the KDE Plasma desktop. So that's very important. You have to think about the fact that there are certain ramifications that go into what setting you will need. So this works for me, but it might not work for you. However, that solves the problem of me having synchronization issues. Then, of course, I showed you Cam Large. It uses the same utilities, sources, the video capture device and the screen. And then I have full, and then last I created one called Desktop. And this one I seldom use, but it's called Blank. Now, there's way more things that you can do with these scenes and sources. What I'm doing is really very basic. There's other people that are using OBS and they do far more complicated things. So this is the basics. Okay, so let's have a look at video capture device. So if I click once on video capture device, which is my camera, and I click the little gear here, and I can go into settings and I can see my pretty face again. And notice here video format. Now this is the thing that I've changed. I've changed video format from YUYV422 to YU12. So basically on this setting I was getting maybe, don't mind my dog back there, maybe 2 or 3 frames captured for every 30 frames, 40 frames, so it was skipping quite a bit. So, and I'm going to hit escape because I don't want that to change. I changed this to YU12 emulated. The problem with emulation, of course, is it can cause more problems with video capturing, like the audio and video not being synced. So that might be one of the effects by doing that. Easy to fix. I left this unchanged. Basically, it's going to use the best resolution that it can use. So I did not change resolution, I did not change frame rate, and I didn't change the color range. But that setting right there, if you notice you're getting a lot of frames where you're missing, change the YU setting here, and it should help you out. Okay. Let's keep going. Well, I got a couple other things that I usually do. I'm going to go into settings here. And if I go to the stream settings, actually I don't need these, but I do want to point out one thing about the stream settings here. Let's say, for the sake of argument, and I use YouTube. Well, I get a stream key and I pop it in here, and I'm really in a hurry one of these days and I'm getting ready to record and I just click stream. The problem is it starts streaming immediately and it sends it. I notice my camera's not working anymore. I don't really care as long as the desktop's working. Let's go back to desktop only. It will automatically begin sending it to the stream server, which means you're going to make a video. So what I recommend doing, either changing to a service you don't use, like Twitter or whatever, and don't put a key in here. Then you have to think about it and actually make a change to your particular service, and then you'll see the key appear if you've already put it in, okay? And then you click OK. Then you have to go back and click Start Streaming. That way you have a failsafe that'll keep you from accidentally streaming when you didn't intend to. Alright, in order to get the camera working, I restarted OBS because I know you want to look at my beautiful, beautiful mug, I guess we'll call it. Anyway, so we talked about the streaming stuff. Now, I've never used studio mode. Like I said, this is kind of a basic primer, and I don't know everything about the settings in here. I only know what works for me. So let's go into settings again. We talked about streaming and why I don't have the key in unless, of course, I change it to one I don't use. And let's go to output. Now, bit rate unfortunately can vary. So I don't remember what the default bit rate is. I think it's like 1500 kbps. That's pretty low. So you want to keep increasing the bit rate until you find that your system is starting to hiccup, you're starting to get drop frames in video and things like that, and then just go back a little bit. Notice here that my encoder is software. What that basically means is the CPU, the processor, has to do all the encoding. You can use an NV encoder if you have an NVIDIA card, and then I believe there's also an encoder if you're using a Radeon AMD card. However, it takes a little bit of work to get set up, and I can't actually use the NV encoder, mainly because I'm using the built-in Intel video, because I get way more power savings than I do with the NVIDIA chipset that's also on board on this laptop. And in Linux, sadly, you have to do one or the other. It can't be both. So I could set everything up with NVIDIA, and then I could compile the NVIDIA encoder, and I would get really, really good hardware performance. So if this laptop was only going to be used to do OBS Studio stuff, and I was basically going to be recording frequently and wasn't concerned about battery life, I probably would do the hardware encoding. Audio bitrate, personally I think 160 is more than good enough. You know, your mileage may vary. You may need something much higher, or you might be able to do with 128. I don't consider the audio stream that much of a liability, so it's not processor intensive with these modern processors, and storage size really doesn't go up that high. I have linked streaming and recording so the settings are the same. I don't do much with audio, so there really aren't very many changes with audio. So let's look at video. Notice it's not going to let me make changes right now because we're actually recording. So the base canvas of this particular laptop is 3840 by 2160 or 4K. Well, I really don't want to create 4K videos because the file size would be huge. So what I do is scale the output, and we have some scaling options here which won't even let me show you. I usually go with the default because essentially it's going to be the least processor intensive, and we'll look at processor use in just a second. And the frame value that I'm looking at is about 30 frames per second. And it does tell me that my video output is currently active. The other thing I like to do is create some hotkeys here. And you could do all kinds of them. So you could do show video, hide video, things like that. But I have one called home. Actually, I'm not even thinking straight. One called cam full, which is my mug. If I hit the home key and then the N key for cam large and small, and I use the least likely to be used left bracket. Now you can do, of course, control and another key, or shift alt and another key, if you want to ensure you don't accidentally hit that key and throw you into desktop only when you really intended to be doing full camera. So that's a very useful setting. We talked about file size, so let us, I think I'll just minimize this, cruise over to File Manager. Oops. Stop. And I'm going to go to Videos. And you can see I have a whole bunch of videos in here. This is the one I recorded earlier, the first half of this particular video. And you can see that that video's total size was 200 megabytes. I figure we recorded for 3 or 4 minutes. I probably could increase the kilobits per second rate that we were looking at. We'll go over that again. And here is the actual recording we're doing now, slowly inching up there. When you go back to OBS and go into the settings, you really want to try and get as high a kbps setting as you can that your system will tolerate. that right there will give you the best image quality, but keep in mind that when you do increase it, you may have processing issues. With my desktop system, which I have a 2700X 8-core, I could put it to anything I wanted. I could do 10 or 20,000. But there is a point of diminishing returns, right? Where you put a number in, 20,000 kbps, and the equipment is already doing the best it can when you hit, say, 15,000 kbps. Now, in my case, I'd like to be able to push this to about 5,000. So I'm going to have to experiment with the settings again. I want to avoid the drop frames. Those are very, very annoying to me. And they do cause issues because the video really gets hard to watch when you see drop frames. The other thing I wanted to talk about is CPU consumption. We can see here that this process is consuming 11% of the processor at 30 frames a second. We've been recording for about 7 minutes. And in 7 minutes, we've done about 150 megabytes. So once I stitch these two files together in my video editor, you know, it's probably going to be 500, 600 megabytes. Now, if I'd done it, of course, at 4K, it would have been much larger. And because you're really pushing the system when you come up here and change your video output to actual original resolution 4K, you can expect many more drop frames. So on this particular system, I don't do that. On my desktop system with a 4K external video camera that has encoding built in, of course, it's going to work much, much better. All right, so let's do one last thing. I want to have a look at system monitor. And I'm going to minimize this. We're just going to get a look at what the overall system load is. So overall load is 14%. Not bad. Memory usage, not bad at all. 3.2 gigs of 30 gig. So when I originally bought this laptop, I had 16 gigabytes in. I added another 16 gigabyte DIMM, and I have two 1 terabyte SSDs in here. I added a second one myself, so it originally came with the 1 terabyte. What's going to happen if you have a lower CPU? So this one is a 6-core Intel Xeon processor, so it really does very, very well. Well, basically what you'll see happen is the processor usage will increase. It'll go up when the quality of your processor goes down. So if you have, you know, like a 6th or 7th generation i5, I would not expect to be able to get a high resolution both in the actual output as well as for the camera and all those things. So here, back in the settings again, with the video capture device, I don't know why I did this, because now it's going to time out again. Ah, well, what can you do? You probably want to select a smaller resolution deliberately so that your system will be fully functional and you won't drop frames. And look at that, it froze. Hold on, we'll be right back. And in the settings, your output quality is going to change because the processor will essentially get overwhelmed. And don't think that because it shows a low overhead processor-wise, say, well, you know what, it's only showing 30%. 30% is that limit. Basically, if it's utilizing 30% of your processor, you will be seeing dropped frames. You'll have to do like a 720 quality video, 720p, shrink the quality of the video camera itself down as much as possible, and maybe take the desktop scaling and change it altogether to 1920 by 1080, which you can do. So those are my recommendations if you're going to be using OBS under Fedora Linux. Now, keep in mind it's very hardware dependent, so the better the hardware you have, the more aggressive you can get on your settings and the higher quality your video can be. I hope you find this video helpful. If you do, like and subscribe. If you really enjoyed it, leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. I realize that many of you are not using OBS Studio, but it's an application that I use a lot, and I wanted to show you its capability and the fact that there's actually very many settings that you can adjust to get the type of performance that you need on your hardware. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on FastGadgets. This video was made possible with support from viewers like you. If you find this video useful, consider becoming a patron for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/FastGadgets.